The movie opens with a man narrating. He talks about childhood, saying you felt invincible and didn't think about consequences. People warned you about repercussions, but life always had the chance to surprise you. In his case, it did. The scene shifts to people enjoying the beach as Doug arrives in town. While reading a book, he looks up and takes in the breathtaking view of the beach. He arrives with his parents, and as they unpack the car, his mom jokes about his many books. Their house is right next to a pier with several boats docked nearby. Doug heads to the pier and meets a friend who excitedly talks about all the women in town, saying it's a wild scene and Doug could easily hook up. They walk along the pier and eventually head to a bar. Inside, a man unplugs the electronics, stopping the band's music and earning some booze. But he grabs a guitar, starts playing with the band, and wins the crowd over. Doug's friend then tosses him an apron and declares that summer has officially begun. Doug comes home and shouts to announce his arrival, but no one is there. He goes to his room and looks at some pictures. When he glances out the window, he notices a new couple moving in. The wife is beautiful, and Doug tries to watch her, but she goes inside. The couple is Elliot and Lena. Doug keeps watching Lena, but she suddenly looks up, startling him. He quickly turns away from the window. Later, Doug rides his bike and spots Lena bending down to clean sand off her shoes. Afterward, he meets his friend, and they talk about girls. Together, they take a mattress to an old boat shed, where they hear laughter from the other side of the beach. They open beers, and Doug's friend promises him an amazing summer. When Doug gets home, he notices the neighbors have finished moving in. Suddenly, his father calls him to meet the new neighbors. Elliot tells Doug that his father mentioned he knows a lot about boats. Elliot invites him to check out his new boat and suggests he might even hire Doug for a job that pays better than mowing lawns. Doug visits the boat the next day and sees Lena returning from a swim. While she heads to the shower, he keeps watching her. When Lena removes her wearings, Doug stares at her until Elliot suddenly appears and asks about the boat. Doug explains that the damage is mostly cosmetic. Elliot mentions he might be leaving for a while. They discuss Elliot's payment and agree on 12, but Elliot admits he would have paid 20. Later, Doug watches Lena through his window again and sees her changing in the neighbor's house. Elliot enters the room and tries to force himself on Lena, prompting Doug to look away. The following day, Elliot drives to the waterfront, where a guard stops him to check his identity. Doug approaches Elliot and explains that the guard is strict. Elliot replies that he prefers it that way. While standing on the boat, Doug asks how Elliot acquired everything he has. Elliot credits money and good looks. The next day, Elliot sees Lena walking by and suddenly hears her scream. He rushes out to find her standing by the car, frightened by a spider. He kills the spider and fixes her car, but feels awkward when Lena gets close to him. Later, Doug tells his friend about the encounter. His friend warns him to be careful, as Lena's husband doesn't seem like someone Doug should mess with. Doug walks home from his job and sees Lena sitting on her porch. She tells him she locked herself out of the house and needs his help to get back in. She asks him to keep it a secret because Elliot had told her to take care of herself. When it starts raining, Lena asks Doug to grab a rock and break the back window. Doug does it, climbs in, and opens the door for her. She invites him inside for a drink and hands him a beer. As they talk, Lena notices Doug has a cut. She cleans it and seductively tells him he'll live. Doug kisses her and apologizes, saying it was bad, but Lena doesn't mind. She tells him to try again and kiss better. They start sharing moment of closeness, and Lena begins to remove her outers. Doug helps her doff, and they do meat injection game. The next morning, they wake up in bed together. Lena tells Doug he was good last night and asks if he's been with a girl before. He jokingly says it was his third time. Doug heads home, smiling as he thinks about the time he spent with Lena. Later, he meets his friend, who plays him a voice note of Doug moaning from the night before. His friend shows him a couple of girls to hook up with, but Doug brushes him off. Doug spends the next few days watching Lena and begins working out to impress her. While working on the boat, Lena approaches him again, saying her husband sent her to check on him. They get into the boat, and Lena asks Doug to close the cover. She starts flirting, disrobing, and they kiss, leading to meat injection game. That night, Doug works at the bar and sees Lena arrive with her husband. His friend points out a couple of girls and mentions he has a good feeling about the night. The next day, Doug rides past a store on his bicycle and notices Elliot stop outside. Curious, Doug enters the shop and finds Lena there. They slip out the back door and have meat smash, but Elliot walks into the store looking for Lena. Hearing him approach, they stop. Lena kisses Doug and returns to Elliot. Later, Elliot inspects the boat Doug is repairing. He criticizes Doug, saying he reminds him of himself and is working hard but needs oversight. Elliot mentions he's leaving town. Taking advantage of Elliot's absence, Doug meets Lena for a picnic on the bed. They share in meat injection conversation, and Lena gives Doug a phone, explaining that Elliot is paranoid and the phone will help them communicate. When Doug rushes to the kitchen, Lena follows, but the gardener sees them. Sometime later, Doug returns to the waterfront and finds Elliot by the boat. Nervous, Doug approaches and sees Lena with him. Elliot asks Doug to take the boat out to test its seaworthiness. During the ride, a beam nearly hits Elliot, but he ducks just in time. Elliot comments that Doug was trying to give him advice about women and asks if Doug has a girlfriend. Doug replies that he does. Suddenly, the boat's engine breaks down, so Elliot checks it. While he's busy, Lena tells Doug she's considering divorcing Elliot. Elliot comes back and asks Doug to fix the engine. Later that night, Lena calls Doug, crying, and says Elliot assaulted her and left on a business trip. Doug rushes to the hospital and urges her to report it to the police, but she refuses, and they leave together. A while later, Doug is working when Lena calls again, this time sunbathing by the beach. She invites him over, and they end up having camping in a boat shack. Lena confesses she feels free with Doug and talks about her husband's first wife and their ongoing court battle. Doug's friends notice something is up and question him about it, but he brushes them off. When Doug returns home, he finds Elliot back. Moments later, Lena calls, urgently asking Doug to come over. Doug rushes to his room, only to find Lena standing behind him. She insists she needs him immediately. Doug rushes to Lena's home and finds out she and Elliot fought. Lena hit Elliot on the head with an object, and Elliot is dead. Lena begs Doug for help, saying she can't get into trouble, and asks what they should do. Doug reassures her that they'll figure something out and advises her to act normal. Doug goes to work at the bar, and when he returns, he finds Lena meeting his parents. The interaction is awkward, and Doug retreats to his room. Later that night, he visits Lena, who apologizes for not being able to stay in her house. She decides to go to Doug's parents' house instead. Doug suggests making Elliot's death look like an accident, but Lena dismisses the idea, saying it won't work. Doug comes up with a new plan. He takes Elliot's body to his boat and instructs Lena to tell the cops that Elliot left after their fight. As Doug is about to leave on the boat, a security guard calls him Mr. Harper, but Doug pretends to be Elliot and sails away. The next morning, the cops investigate what appears to be an accident. Doug watches as they question Lena at her house. To stage the scene, Doug creates another injury on Elliot's head using a beam on the boat, pours alcohol, and uses a cigarette to set the boat on fire. Doug follows his usual routine and serves a couple of cops, discussing the incident. Later, a woman drives into town to meet the police. She informs them that the LA Trust is taking the case seriously because Elliot had a large insurance fund that now goes to Lena, prompting an investigation for foul play. The woman questions Lena about the events and whether the couple had been unfaithful. Lena denies having any extramarital affairs and, irritated by the questions, leaves the conversation. Meanwhile, the cops continue their investigation. The waterfront guard tells them he might have a suspect from that night. The cops question Doug's father, and Doug asks the guard about the suspect. The guard says he thought he saw Elliot that night, but isn't certain. The insurance agent visits the crime scene and notices the broken glass window Doug had left the night he met Lena. The police also question Doug's friend, who suggests Doug might be seeing a woman. This angers Doug, and he storms off. That night, the agent visits Doug's home and asks him about the night Lena came over. She tells him that they want to speak with him. Doug panics and tries to call Lena, but he hangs up when his parents return to the car. At the police station, Doug answers a few questions, and the agent asks about Elliot's relationship with Lena. She pressures Doug to reveal more details, but his mom steps in and says she won't let the agent frame her son. Doug then receives a message from Lena asking him to meet her at the boat shed. Lena tells him they need to stay apart for a while before leaving. When Doug returns home, the investigator is there again. She tells him she needs to take his fingerprints and a mouth swab. They put Doug in the car, and the agent starts questioning him, but Doug remains silent. Later, Doug shares a situation with his friend and parents. Meanwhile, the cops match the blood sample the agent provided. Doug's attempts to prove his innocence fail, likely due to Lena's interference. For instance, a gardener who had seen Doug and Lena together is found murdered before the police can question him. Doug escapes on his bike and heads to the watershed, where he meets Lena. As soon as he arrives, Lena tears her clothes and starts shouting, pretending it was an attempted rape. The police arrest Doug. He tells them they know him and that he needs to clear his name. One officer lets him go, and Doug rushes to Lena's motel to find her cell phone. Just as he searches for it, Lena comes out, and the agent enters. He tells her that the phone has proof of his innocence. The two women walk out, and Doug notices they both have the same tattoo. Doug realizes the agent is actually Lena's lover and has been helping her all along. Everything clicks, and Doug understands he was just a pawn in a bigger game. At first, it seems Lena will let Doug take the fall, but in a final act of love, she leaves him the phone with the evidence. The women are later shown flying off on a plane after claiming Elliot's insurance fund. As the film ends, Doug reflects on how he was sent to prison, but for a shorter time due to reduced charges. Lena and her lover are still on the run, and Doug wonders if he would do it all again. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, hit the like button and subscribe for more content. I love hearing from you, so drop a comment below with your thoughts or suggestions for future videos. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.